All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. My name's Jasper from Score Maine, and we're joined by Joe Powers and Julie Viola on our workshop on funding your business. A vital aspect to running any business is funding. Joe and Julie are experts on the subject, and I've done this workshop with them a few times, and it's always invaluable information that everyone attends. That attends. Anyway, we did want to thank our sponsor today, Gorham Savings Bank, for helping us put this one on, and I want to thank Joe and Julie for presenting today. Why don't you guys get things rolling?
Thank you, Jasper. Appreciate it. All right. Well, we'll kick off. Let's see. I'm just getting my screen oriented here. Looks like number of people in the room, 18 participants. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or interrupt. I think the more questions, the better. So just makes for a more lively discussion. And if you're wondering about something, probably others are too. No doubt there will be some jargon thrown around here that some of you may not recognize. So if there's a term that's thrown out that's throwing you off, let us know and we can clarify that too. Yeah, so again, echoing some comments already made, the workshop is funding your business, where we appreciate Gorham Savings Bank and Julie, who works at Gorham Savings Bank. She'll tell you more about that shortly for sponsoring. And I will jump right into the slide deck here. We're going to have the two of us presenting for the first part of this, and then we'll have Q&A afterwards. We'll make some time, but again, feel free to jump in as we go. This usually takes us about an hour. I've got a hard stop at 1:15, 1:20, so if we can certainly stick around and answer questions after that as needed. So, and Julie and I are going to go back and forth. We kind of take different sections here, but we'll mostly kind of run through the deck. And before we dive into the actual framework of the conversation, just to point out, SCORE, for those of you who are sort of new to SCORE, maybe you heard about this workshop, but don't know what's fully on offer. SCORE is a volunteer organization across the US supported by the SBA. And in Maine, there are close to probably 100, and Jasper, you can correct me if I'm wrong, mentors that are on call, that are available for no cost to entrepreneurs or to people thinking about starting a business. And it's really, it's a great resource. So it's really primarily that it's like one-on-one mentoring. And usually you're paired with someone who's traveled in your shoes or at least done something similar to what you've done. And then there's a bunch of workshops that are also free, and those are workshops like this one. So there's lots more on offer besides this, and we encourage you to check all of those out. We're going to do a quick. Sorry, did you have something to? Someone wanted to say something, Lisa, maybe?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back.
No worries. So we'll I just want to kind of quickly talk through the format today, and then we'll sort of get a sense for who's in the room, and Julie and I will introduce ourselves. We're gonna start with talking about the realities of startup funding. Some of these are kind of taking an objective look at your lifestyle and whether you want to even go down this path. And of course, there's nothing wrong with recognizing limitations and saying like, I'm going to stop before I start. But we also, love working with entrepreneurs, Julie and I. That's why we do what we do. And so we want to be encouraging, but making sure you're going into the journey of entrepreneurship with eyes wide open. We'll talk about the term bootstrapping, grant. Well, then we'll step through grants, loans, and equity. These are different types of funding. And we'll talk about where to find perhaps some of this funding. And as far as the last bullet point goes, how to sign up for a SCORE mentor, that's easy. You can just go down to the SCORE website and find someone there. So again, highly encourage you to do that. Julie, do you want to take a beat and just introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. Excuse me. My name is Julie Viola. I'm a commercial lender, commercial banker here at Gorham Savings Bank. And I think, I don't know, I'm starting my 23rd or 24th year here. I have the distinct privilege of working within the small business banking area. So we are, kind of boots on the ground every day, working on SBA loans, FAME loans, working with businesses who have, probably less than 200 employees and, less than $10 million in gross sales. I mean, some are just starting, some are growing, some are scaling, but the variety of customers that I work with here spans the gamut. And I think that's really what you see in small business, here in Greater Portland and Southern Maine. I'm a Portland native. I've lived and worked in this community my entire life, and if you know of Viola, we're probably related somehow. But what I would say is that as a banker in community banking, we live, we work, and we lend in these communities. So it's super important for us to be able to engage with small businesses and entrepreneurs to help them navigate the funding cycle. As you'll see in our presentation, there's lots of nuances for it, but it's also something that taking the time to educate yourself, and I'm glad that you're here today, because it is not just like going to a car dealership and saying, I want to buy this car, what's the monthly payment? There's a process. When you own a business, we're evaluating your business as well as yourself. I also have the kind of privilege, I didn't realize I'm still in the swag, Joe. I'm on the board with Maine Venture Fund that Joe will talk a little bit about it at a piece as well. But being involved in the small business community, helping to find ways to connect what we call the alphabet soup to all of you as entrepreneurs is really what's important to me. So it's a lot of fun to engage with folks in these settings. So please, if you have questions along the way, do raise your hand, pop it in the chat. Let's help you get your questions answered, because this isn't a one size fits all situation. There's lots of different pieces. And the education, as I said, is the most important part. So I'm really glad to be here today, and I'm glad you're here as well.
Thanks, Julie. I'd echo a lot of that. And, Julie pointed out that she's on the Maine Venture Fund board, which is the organization that I work for. And her point about there, being alphabet soup, there's lots of organizations in Maine that can help you navigate the funding that you need. So it tends to be the case that if you go into a, one door, if that's not the right place for you to be, you get redirected elsewhere. And so I think living in Maine is one of the advantages of being in a sort of a small, more community oriented place, that you do find your path to where you need to get to, even if you're not quite sure where to start. So myself, like I mentioned, Maine Venture Fund is the organization. It's a state-sponsored venture capital fund, which is really aimed at making equity investments into the highest potential companies here in Maine. And we're at base are really an economic development tool of the state, but otherwise like any other venture fund, in that we're trying to find those really aggressive growth companies. And we'll talk more about what equity means and why it's sort of such a niche thing, and right for some companies, but really not for most. And demystify that a little bit. And obviously we'll get much more into the weeds on the debt side with Julie. So more to come there. I guess before, maybe I'll just take a quick second here too. I'm going to back up to the next slide so we're not distracting ourselves. If you want to maybe take yourself off mute or put into the chat your first name and just one sentence what you are working on, whether it's a company or an idea, then we can get a sense of who's in the room a little bit. So feel free to do that now if you're so inclined. And in the meantime, while you're doing that, there's one question in the chat: how does a state-owned VC function? Long story short, it's an evergreen fund. So we were set up by the Maine state legislature 20 years ago with $5 million that was carved out of the state budget. And then our task was to invest that in companies that are going to provide a positive return. And when that return happens, it gets recycled into the fund and invested into other Maine companies. So that's the mechanism by which we operate, and it's worked pretty well over the last almost 30 years. So, and we can talk more about that if there are specific questions. So some folks introducing themselves over chat. Rich is starting a taxi company, very cool. Leonard is a small comedy club in Auburn. Nick is looking to fund buying a business, very interesting. Rory Nickerson, Mamma Mia, making mobile art studio, very cool. Holly with Singing Pastures, Greg with Mariner Construction, trying to figure out how to expand quicker. Wendy, expanding affordable rental housing, very important. Rachel, a farm in Newport. Lisa, commercial broker, looking for funding for clients, as well as herself. Joelle, bootstrap data science consultancy, and now pivoting into digital. Josephine, an actuary. Craig, starting graphics design business with his wife. So really great to see some of the different things coming through. And Julie mentioned it. It's a different journey for every different type of company and stage, and so we'll try to make this broadly applicable. But inevitably, there may be things that you want to hear more or less about, and so you can pay attention accordingly. Nick, the Lakeshore House Lodging and Pub, and Monson. So we're glad to have you all here, and we'll forge ahead. So mentioned at the outset, this sort of starting off with a little bit of a reality check. So there are, entrepreneurship is really a lifestyle. It's a particular sort of personality. It tends to be, and people who people may or may not fit into that. And I think I myself fancied myself an entrepreneur, and I may have some entrepreneurial tendencies. I'm certainly really interested in new businesses and creative solutions to problems. But when I dipped my toe into it for a couple of years, I actually realized that I wasn't that suited to run a company. Some of the things that, and I feel much more of a fit in an investor seat working with companies, but not taking that risk myself. So some of these questions that you want to ask yourself are how well you work independently. Obviously, working independently really is the early stages of starting a company, and then aligning what you love to do with the project you're working on. I think all of you have some level of passion for what you're doing, and maybe some of you have more passion or less, and you're feeling like, I need to be able to wake up every morning and go to sleep every night excited about this in order to put as much energy as it needs into it. And sometimes early on, if you realize like, I'm not actually enjoying this, that you want to pay attention to that. Some other points to think about, you're always a salesperson, especially as a founder, early stage company. So thinking about, that the process of that, whether you can do it, whether you like to do it, thinking about the fact that unlike a larger company, there are no vacation days or sick days or benefits generally at early stage companies. In general, there's a lot more financial uncertainty.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, Juliana, there you go. There you go. Sorry to call you out, but just heard some noise there. If you feel free to log a question in if you have one. And then lastly, just thinking about your own financial history, right? How have you done with any loans that you've had, car payments, mortgage payments, that type of thing? Are you comfortable sharing your personal financial information? A lot of people feel like when they go in for a loan that it's, if they're asking about their business they're going to start, what does it have to do with my personal finances? And as you'll hear from Julie, it's really, one and the same, especially at those early phases. So you have to really understand the fact that you're going to be sharing a lot of that with whoever you go to, and then also understanding the numbers themselves, right? What is the plan going forward? How do I think about all the costs and expenses that I'm going to incur? And then how am I going to make money? And, do these things balance out? And if you don't have those skills, there are ways to get them. Obviously, one is, attending a lot more SCORE workshops around the financial literacy aspect. And then, obviously hiring some support, CPAs or others who have that skill set, and it can help you along. So not to, the intent of this slide is not to really pour cold water on your ambitions, but, these are important questions to ask. And sometimes people get, pretty far down the path before they realize, and they've spent a lot of money or maybe other people's money before they realize, actually, maybe I should have asked these questions of myself sooner. So we like to point those out. And also a sort of a common misconception is that there's free money if you just know where to find it. And maybe that's what you're coming to this workshop hoping for. but it all takes effort, and depending on the size of the amount that you're going after, it's kind of more or less correlated with how hard it is to get. So, your personal savings tend to be where most people go first. It's easily accessible, but not everybody has a big pool of personal savings to dip into. And this is just showing how else people fund their businesses. So you can see there's a variety of things, like the things you would expect, finding a loan from a bank, friends and family, credit cards, even drawing on your home equity, crowdsourcing. So these are different places to find money. We'll talk again, as I mentioned at the outset, about grants, debt, and equity broadly, but these are all sort of entrepreneurial sources. And some of them are a little more fraught with risk than others, right? Like maxing out your credit card month over month has consequences to your sort of financial health. And so you want to be cautious and understand the consequences before you do that type of thing. The framework for now getting into these sort of larger buckets that I mentioned is we'll just go through these one at a time. We'll talk about bootstrapping, and we think of this as a category of where to find cash because it incorporates a lot of the stuff you saw in the previous slide. Like I'm going to use my own savings. I'm going to find friends and family, the things that that you can do to kind of work around funding limitations in the early phases, and also tying that with making progress on the business and verifying assumptions or disproving assumptions. And we'll talk more about that process. And then, grants, debt, equity, we'll sort of demystify each of these. I'm going to bulldoze right ahead into bootstrapping, and then I'm going to hand the reins over to Julie for grants and debt, where we'll spend the majority of the time. And then I'll talk more about equity before we close out. Okay. Just a quick look into the chat. Looks like no questions at the moment. So these 4 categories are also generally, you can think of them sort of on a spectrum of your business maturity, although you can really do bootstrapping at any phase of a business. You can get grants at any phase of a business, but people tend to do more bootstrapping and grants early on. And then, once they have something to show for that, their efforts, usually that's a time where you can go and secure debt and equity. Generally, not necessarily, but just to frame that up a bit. So bootstrapping. The definition of bootstrapping is I think it comes from pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? It's sort of this idea of self-sufficiency. It's making as much progress with the business for the least amount of time and money. And again, usually this is referred to as money that comes from alternative sources. And so usually there's not a ton of it available. Again, it's your own savings, and maybe it's friends and family. And so as a result, you have to be so careful about how you spend it. And specifically, you have to really aim it towards the things that are going to help you determine whether you really have something with this idea and you can go out and scale it or not. Or you just need to make a little, change and tweak and try a different direction and tweak and try a different direction. Those are pivots, as you maybe have heard of that term, that may happen once or twice or a dozen or 50 times before you really get to the point where you're like, okay, there's something really here. I'm noticing customers are really enjoying my muffin recipe. I've got it dialed in, and now I'm ready to go out and get that bank loan, for example. Just a little more on bootstrapping. You might also hear the term minimal viable product, which is really a fancy way of, and the acronym is MVP. It's really a fancy way of saying, what is that point at which I have a viable product, right? The point at which I've tried a few different things. I've tried a few different approaches. To continue the example I used, I've tried a few different recipes, and now I know people really like this one. And so now I've achieved my minimum viable product. And now I'm going to sort of take it to scale. So let's just say I created some muffins in my, home kitchen. I brought them to a farmer's market, and that was how I did my bootstrapping. And I did that week after week. And, I got people's feedback, and eventually the feedback started to get better and better. And that's sort of my, that's my bootstrapping. That's me creating my product on a minimum viable scale, just doing it in my home kitchen, right? Not much cost outlay. And then now I've got a recipe that people really love. Maybe I've got a few different types of muffins or a few different types of baked goods. And I'm feeling more confident now that I can sort of take this and lease a space and buy some equipment and start building this out. So that process that you see on this slide of getting out there and selling it, getting feedback and rinsing and repeating is really something that you should expect. You should expect not to nail it the first time. If you do, that's pretty lucky. And if you don't, then that's totally normal, and you get better by rinsing and repeating. And there's a book about this process that's pretty accessible called The Lean Startup. I think this is sort of a whole business philosophy that's worth its own book, and I would highly encourage folks to go out and read it. I recommend this book to folks all the time. I gave the example of a farmer's market, but there's lots of different ways to get that feedback from customers, right? The way in which the feedback is valuable is if it resembles what you're trying to build. And so if it's the actual muffin you can actually give someone and hear feedback about, that's great. If you're building a gym and it's kind of you really need something larger to represent what you're actually trying to create, the interior environment and the location and all those things, and you have to be a little bit more creative about how do I still test the fact that people are going to want these amenities or this location, et cetera. And so there's ways you can figure out ways to do this. Moving away from the gym example, I think if you go up a level again, there's just how do I find the time and place? You can think about nights and weekends, keeping your day job, and you'll hear that phrase a couple times in this presentation. Keeping your day job is usually a pretty good idea until you really feel like you've nailed that new direction. And you can keep your day job while you do these types of things. And you could subcontract from a larger business. You can put your, maybe I put my muffins in the window of an existing bakery, or some kind of, natural foods store that already is leasing a space and lets me do that for a small fee. Working special events, whether it's that farmer's market or catering or something else, where you're able to interface with your customer and crucially get the feedback that you're looking for. The idea of friends and family is something, as you saw on a previous slide, something that is pretty common. These are people who know you, right? They understand your passion for this particular pursuit and they want to support you. And we say be careful what you wish for, because it's these people are inclined to support you without really doing a full analysis of the risks of the business, and that's great on the one hand. On the other hand, it can create some frustrations and even destroy relationships that are really important to you when things don't go well. So a way to avoid that or mitigate that is to have an actual set of documents that you sign, and you're both saying, this is what happens if we decide to do the business differently, or I get injured and the $10,000 that you invested essentially goes up in flames, right? There's you want to sort of figure out as many contingencies as possible and make sure both sides are comfortable with that. And it can feel really formal to do with a sister or brother or a parent or a cousin, whatever. But it's really the right thing to do. And we always recommend getting legal advice for how to document these things. But there are also templates online if you just can't afford a lawyer and you just need something to start with. Some sort of documentation is really important. And mostly, what are the expectations for repayment? Very important to state. And then, I mentioned sort of these alternative sources of capital. Crowdfunding is certainly one of them. I would say, this is a growing, maybe less stigmatized way to get capital. I think 10 years ago, there was a little bit of like, maybe a stigma associated with crowdfunding, like hey, this company is not able to find capital elsewhere, so they're turning to crowdfunding. I don't think you sort of see or feel much of that these days. It's a really creative and good way to find funding for the most part. You in some of these sites, this is just an example. There's a bunch more. Some of these sites will actually be small pieces of ownership of the company in turn for investment. Some of them are actually just grants effectively in return for a t-shirt or something like that. That's what you'll see on Kickstarter a lot. I'm going to send you a sticker or, the product when it's ready, but I'm not selling part of my company. So the point is each of these sites works differently. Make sure you understand how they work, and some of them are better suited to some types of companies than others. But it's a fantastic opportunity if you have a company that fits well with these. And SCORE has a crowdfunding guidebook that's really good too. So if you are interested in this, then you can find that through SCORE. All right, I will turn over the mic now to Julie to dive into grants.
All right, sorry about that. I had to push all the buttons. So let's talk a little bit about grants. We can go to the next slide, Joe. I think one of the most important things to really understand, besides the fact that grants can be very challenging to obtain, the difference between grants and loans are grants are typically not repaid, where a loan, you're going to pay back monthly payments. But grants usually, or grants that I see in the business space, usually require some type of specific objectives and usually will require some type of match from your business. So for example, here in the city, there's a job creation grant program that gets funded usually every year. So for you creating a job in the city, you are able to, apply for and receive match funding for the jobs that you create. Oftentimes, and we can go to the next slide, oftentimes they are sponsored by some type of foundation or government agency, like the city, the state. MTI is another one of the alphabet soup you may have heard of, but they're looking to support specific missions. Maybe it's job creation, maybe it's technology, maybe it is innovation in certain food sectors, but they aren't one size fits all for what your business may be or what you're looking to do today. Grant writing in the nonprofit space is a full-time job. It is an art. It can be super time consuming. And in most business grants that I have seen in the last handful of years, there is some type of check and balance. So they will be looking over your shoulder to say, you said you were going to hire X number of people. Have you done that? They're looking over your shoulder. So while obtaining grants, when we go to the next slide, while obtaining grants is a great idea because they are just money that's getting put into your business without any repayment, they are super challenging and a little bit scarce. So let's go into debt. The next slide. Debt is probably the most common form of funding for businesses. This particular slide, and we will get the slide deck to you, or you might want to grab a screenshot of this as we're talking through it. This is some of the most common sources in the state of Maine for non-bank lending. And we'll talk a little bit about the different lending sources. But these folks here, the Finance Authority of Maine, Maine Technology Institute, which is MTI, CEI, which is Coastal Enterprises, Community Concepts, the USDA, and then local and county governments. These are sort of what we would call the community-based loan programs. So, for example, the FAME website is a place you can go to. You can log on to their portal, and there's a common app. And what they will do is collect information from you and your business, and they will connect you with several state-affiliated resources for providing loans. As you're learning about funding your business, what you will find is that banks may have certain objectives that they're looking for, certain types of, whether it's cash flow, credit, collateral, which we'll get into, but these sources that are here on this slide are ones that are really working through the small business sector. So CEI, as an example, has one that specializes, a loan program that specializes in daycare. Community Concepts has a great program. Actually, that one's through CEI, I think, which is the Wicked Fast Loan Program. You can go to the CEI website, log on. Community Concepts is what we call a micro lender. So they do some direct SBA lending. But the one that I like to always point folks to is that county and local government one. So depending on where your business is doing business, are you in the city of Portland? Are you in the town of Gorham? Are you in South Portland? Are you in Cumberland County? Are you in York County? Are you in Androscoggin County? Most of those counties have something like the Greater Portland Council of Governments. So in Cumberland County, Greater Portland Council of Governments has their own pool of money that they can lend to businesses that are starting and growing. Androscoggin County has AVCOG. York County has SFMA, which is the Southern Maine Finance Agency. And then, like I said, many cities and towns have loan programs specifically for businesses in their communities that are growing, starting, and looking for funding that may not quite be ready for bank loans. So these are great resources to investigate, to take a look at, and consider if your business is new or just getting started. So we can go to the next slide.
I just interject briefly or add, Julie, that many of these programs and these organizations that Julie's pointing out on the slide also have grant programs. And as Julie mentioned, grants are typically, really even more sort of specific to the location or the type of business. There was a question in the chat from Joelle that said, and I'll tip this one to you, Julie. It said, what type of consequences do grant providers give you if you fail to hit your specific objectives? In other words, what's the risk tolerance for granting organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it absolutely varies by the type of grant and then also the level of due diligence that you need to apply. For example, the due diligence for the city of Portland, it's almost as much information as applying for a loan. They're doing a lot of due diligence to make sure that your business will be successful. But it's a question that you will always want to ask when you're entering any grant situation. You're providing a loan for, a grant for $5,000 or $25,000. And what are the consequences if we're not able to deliver on what our specific goals and purposes are? MTI, as an example, they have a grant program in the technology space. And I had a customer who was launching a technology product, and they weren't able to get it to market in the timeline that MTI required. They were able to get an extension, and then still they missed the deadlines. What MTI ended up doing was providing like a term loan to them to pay the money back because there were specific strings in that grant that said you had to do X, Y, and Z for this funding to be considered a grant and be fully forgivable. So understanding the terms and conditions with which you take grant money, it may truly be just no strings, here you go, here's some cash, or there may be specific strings tied to what that grant organization's specific objectives are. So always the devil is in the details. And I saw somebody ask the question about interest rates for these loan programs versus traditional funding. So what you'll find is interest rates from some of these state-based lenders will be a little bit higher than traditional bank lending. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those nuances and those differences. However, I think what's important is that as you are investigating how you're going to finance your business is understanding terms and conditions. And sometimes bank funding or bank financing isn't always for you. And if you're working with a state loan program to get your business up, to get it funded, there's always opportunities later on to refinance it to market rates. But what you will find is that the rates from folks like Community Concepts or CEI or the AVCOGs or GPCOGs will be a little bit higher than market rate because usually there's a little bit more risk for those lenders.
Yeah, maybe MTI might be an exception to that. I think MTI loans tend to be lower than market. But as Julie says, there might be other provisions there that that sort of protect them against some of that added risk. So it's just important to know. There was a question about the crowdfunding guide that I mentioned, and looks like Jasper posted that into the chat for those of you interested. So thank you, Jasper.
Great.
All right. Sorry for the delay, Julie. Next slide.
No, great questions. All right, so let's talk a little bit about banks and a little bit about funding, because I think this is the one that people generally don't understand. And I think understanding sort of these nuances is super important to you. And I get real passionate about it, as Joe knows. Working for a community-based lender, there's just certain nuances in our communities that make us different in terms of all the banks that I have listed. So for example, national banks, you're familiar with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, TD Bank. There is there is a goal and there is a spot on every corner for all of these banks. But what you really need to think about for your business is, how will I interact with my money? If yours is a business where you may be traveling and you need access in Florida or Arizona or wherever it is, maybe it's even New York City, you might want to choose a bank that you have access to a branch in those locations. But if your business is truly a Main Street business, then you want to go to the main street of the community where you live and choose maybe a regional, a community, or a credit union. So again, another difference in these institutions, the national banks, the larger banks, they'll collect information. You might be able to go onto their website, make application for a commercial loan, but these things are usually, they're gathered up and they're sent away to national underwriting. When you're working with the community banks like Bath, Gorham, Norway, Maine Community Bank, or the credit unions, Evergreen, Town and Country, Infinity, you're going to find that those are all institutions that have local decision making, local bankers who live and work in those communities, and they understand the markets with which they're lending and can develop a risk tolerance that may be different from the national banks. And then the internet space banks, I know so many people, their first instinct is to www dot something, right? And I get it, it's convenient, it's 24/7. But what I have found in my experience is that, when you're dealing with the internet-based banks or maybe the national banks, and you're a small business here in Maine, being able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody is challenging. So as you're thinking about how is your business going to grow, how will you interact with your money? Do you need access to cash? Do you need to process credit cards? Will you have a lot of checks to deposit? How are your customers paying you? Do you need to originate wires? Do you need to have ACH payments? You want to find a bank that will grow with your business and where you can find somebody that you can talk to discover what your business banking needs are, whether it's in the future for borrowing or today just to deposit money as you're getting started. All banks have a very important role in our financial, ecosystem. But what I always say to folks is choose your banking partner wisely. It's difficult to change banks when you have everything all set up. And oftentimes, when you're working, you can go to the next slide, when you're working with the banks that are similar to your business, you'll find that you're going to have success if they're similarly matched to what you're doing in your business. The other piece that I would say in all of this is, please do not wait until you need the cash to start the process. Securing funding takes time on the commercial side, whether you're working with a bank, whether you're going to think about venture capital, whether you're going to think about, working with Greater Portland Council of Governments. This is not business lending is not like walking into the car dealership, as I mentioned earlier, and saying, I'd like the blue one and I'd like to go home with it today. And their response to you is, well, what's your monthly payment? It's not how commercial lending works. And if those are your expectations, you may be very disappointed. But what I would say to you is that the banking relationship should be viewed as long-term. There will be different banks who have different rates. Some do SBA lending, some do FAME lending, some banks don't even do small business lending. There are some that do operating company lendings. There are some banks that do just commercial real estate funding. And those are very different types of situations. But understanding your business and what your banking needs are just really important so that you're able to find a banking partner to help you navigate the process of, you're generating revenue, you need to deposit that money, you have bills to pay, you need to find ways to be able to move your money, but also to be able to, if you need to borrow money, you'll have access to somebody who can help you navigate that process. The question is, what is FAME? I'm glad you asked. As a banker, these are abbreviations and things that I throw out there, and I sometimes forget to go back and stop. So most of you may be familiar with the SBA, which is the Small Business Administration. We'll talk about SBA lending as we go through this. But FAME is the Finance Authority of Maine. The Finance Authority of Maine is an amazing partner here in Maine. If you go to their website, you will see that they have a portal, for example, that you can log on to, provide all your information, and they can help match you with a state-based lender. They also provide student loans. They do a lot of different kinds of financing pieces for Maine and Maine-based businesses. They provide agency guarantees, like the SBA does for banks. And then in some situations, the Finance Authority of Maine, or FAME, does do some direct lending as well. FAME is what, when as a banker, when I look at the difference between the SBA and FAME, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the SBA typically is what we call a cash flow lender, and the Finance Authority of Maine on the business side is usually what we call a collateral lender. So we'll talk about all those terms as we go forward, but we can go to the next slide. Good question. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what is in a bank loan application. For many of you, your only experience with seeking financing is maybe it was a student loan. Maybe it was, I always pick on the car dealerships because they're easy to pick on. Maybe you've purchased a car. If you've been through the home buying purchase and you've applied for a home loan or a mortgage or a home equity line of credit, you've seen the difference between the level of due diligence when you go to buy a home and when you go to buy a car. Business lending is sort of a hybrid of going to buy a home. We're going to ask about your information personally, but we're also going to really dig into your business. So who is your business? Now, depending on how long your business has been in business, a business plan with financial projections is super important. If you're starting a business, your business plan needs to be very detailed. It needs to tell the who, what, when, where, and why of your business. And the financial projections, usually the first year is month by month. Years 2 and 3 can be annualized, but it's a full-blown, profit and loss and balance sheet. If you have a SCORE mentor, this is something that they can help you do. SCORE has some amazing resources to help you start your business plan, kind of challenge you with your business plan, but also some really cool templates to help you start to work on those projections. You'll also be asked to provide, as part of your business plan, your personal background, your resume. Who are you? What do you bring to this business? Do you have the experience to start this business, grow this business, run this business? Those background pieces of information are super important. The other items that we will collect are federal tax returns for you and your business. Usually it's the last 2 or 3 years, depending on the amount of financing that you're seeking. A personal financial statement is probably, I would say in my experience, my customer's least favorite document to provide. But basically it is a statement that says, who are you as an individual and what is your personal financial situation? So that when the bank goes and pulls your personal credit, those two items we're able to reconcile them. So what are the things that are your personal assets? Do you have savings, a checking account, maybe a 401k? Do you own a home? And then on the other side is, who do you owe money to? You might have a home equity line of credit, you might have a car loan, a student debt, any of those kinds of pieces. But the personal financial statement is giving us that view into you as an individual to see, how do you turn the lights on at home? And then how is that going to translate into your business? Collateral, I think I mentioned this once before. When you buy a home and you take out a loan for your home, the bank files a mortgage. Your home is collateral for your home loan. If for some reason you weren't able to make your obligations and on your loan for your home, the bank can foreclose and take your home. In business, collateral is usually accounts receivable. It's usually inventory and equipment list. You might be asked to pledge your personal residence, but it's really the first thing we look at is, what are the assets of the business? If your business is a business that provides a product or service and you bill your customer, then you'd be driving some accounts receivable aging versus, true cash base where, and Joe used the muffin example, people pay you at the point of sale. So really understanding what are the assets of your business that you can pledge as collateral. Other pieces of information that you really need to have pinned down before you start to apply for bank loans is, what is the nature of your business? What's its legal entity? Will you be a sole proprietor? Will you be an LLC? Will you be an S corporation? These are super important details that you need to have before you apply for a loan. And this is a place where I always take a moment to step back and say, as you're navigating growing or launching a business, having a good banker that you can kind of talk to, get advice from, having a good attorney, having a good CPA, having a good insurance agent for your business are all important. And getting your entity set up properly, whether it's an S Corp or an LLC. Again, there are lots of resources you can go to online and do it, but it doesn't necessarily help you put together maybe a partnership agreement or really help you understand what it means to set these entities up and how these entities can and cannot act. So finding somebody that you can work with, and again, SCORE is another resource to kind of help get these things started, is important. And then the detailed sources and uses table, I just can't stress how important this piece is. What you're saying to your lender is, this is how much I need to launch or grow this business. And here are the details. I'm building a building, and here are the 15, line items that are going into it. The plumbing, the electrical, the appliances, all of those kinds of things, the foundation. But it's the same thing if you're launching and growing a business that does, maybe doesn't have a building associated with it. You have marketing, you have inventory, you need to spend money on maybe, fixing up the lease space that you're going to do, you have salaries, but all of the costs, including the legal expenses, that is an example, but dig into those details to say, how much is it going to cost to launch or grow my business? And then, where are we going to attain money? As the owner, I'm going to put in 20% of this total cost. I'm going to ask the bank for 80% of the total cost, or maybe you've raised money from friends and family, etc. But being able to really dig in detail how much you need to borrow and how much does it cost to get whatever this project is off the ground is super, super important. Let me go to the next slide. I think someone asked about templates for these types of things. So yeah, if you're working with a SCORE mentor, SCORE has some really great really great tools for that. The SBA website has some really great tools for that as well. And oftentimes you can do Google search and find those resources. What I always say to folks is, when you are looking to borrow money for your business, the numbers are one of the most important things that you need to understand, whether it's how do you generate revenue, what are the costs to turn the lights on, and then how do you bring all those pieces together? Is this going to be a viable business, or how much do I even have to charge for my product? So being able to articulate what your projections look like, but also how much do you need to launch and grow your business, and then what are those sources of capital, whether it is equity, whether it is friends and family, whether it's a bank loan, super important. But yes, between SCORE, the SBA website, and even a Google search, you'll find great examples of those kinds of things. But I just can't say how important it is to work with a mentor to help you navigate this, also to sometimes help push you along, challenge you, ask some questions. Just because there isn't one of the types of businesses that you're thinking of starting doesn't mean that it's a bad one, but having someone else to bounce those ideas off and understand maybe the nuances of an industry is super important.
And I'll just add, I think this is meant to be a little bit of your own litmus test of where am I in terms of the stage of my business or my idea, right? If the things that Julie's talking about, none of these things you have baked, you haven't set up your LLC, those types of things. That's fine. It just means that you're probably not ready for that banking conversation. And Julie's, as most, especially local bankers is great about having the conversation, even if you're not quite ready. And one of the things she can do is walk you through this. And actually, when I first came to Maine, ended up in Julie's office, and I had a business idea about a sort of a club, a business club, co-working space, spa thing. And I was jazzed about it, but I didn't really know what's the step that I need to take to start this in motion. And so I walked physically into a branch and talked to Julie, and she walked me and my business partner through these things. And then we, of course, went off and found the templates for the pieces that we didn't have together yet. Some of these things we had together. And if you're on the other hand, if you're feeling like, oh, I've got all these things, I just need to put them together in one, folder, virtual or otherwise, and walk into a branch, great. But that's really what it is. It's, and this is one of the reasons why working with a local branch is important. You can actually walk in and physically talk to someone like Julie, and you can orient to what are the gaps, if there are any. And usually it's not just, it's almost never like you walk in, you just put it on the desk, and then, they're able to do their underwriting process. It takes a little bit of digging. And then to Julie's point, if you end up at walking into an attorney's office or walking into an accountant's office as a result of your meeting with a banker or vice versa, that's typically how it goes, right? And you sort of track all these leads down to get the things that you need. And you may say, like, I'm just not at the point where I'm ready to have a fully baked business plan because I don't really know 100% of the direction I'm going. And that's where you back up a step. And again, to Julie's point, you go to the mentor, you spend time, weeks, months, years, getting to the point where you actually have a tight story and you have all of these things compiled. And it's just, it's not bad that you don't have those things together, right? It's just a reflection of where you are in terms of the stage of the evolution of your business.
It really is. And I think, what I would tell you in my many years here, it's even, kind of getting yourself connected in those right places. Most of my business, as an example, comes from referrals, customers that I've worked with, or folks that I have, kind of met through networking and all kinds of different places that I've been, spending the time to do things like this, finding somebody that you can, have a conversation with, that you can talk to. If you're, is this ready? Am I at a place where this makes sense? Or, spending time at chamber, whatever the sort of the business area or industry that you're looking to grow, launch, or expand, getting that industry experience so that you are ready and positioned to be able to say to whether it's a banker or an investor, yes, I am at a place where I understand where my business is headed and I'm prepared. I've done my homework. And I think it's do startup businesses get funded? Absolutely. But the process for that it takes work and time and thinking through the rest of the project. I think, as Joe talked about in the early slides, do I have what it takes to own my own business? Do I have industry experience so that I'm not just coming up with an idea and looking for money? Or, do you have some of that savings so that you can kind of get this scaled, kind of get this growing, demonstrate that there's really a product for your business, in your location or in your area? There are so many businesses that get started and never borrow a dime. They do it completely organically from cash flow out of their business, and it's truly impressive. But if yours is a business that is capital intensive, or you need to buy some equipment, sometimes you do have to step back and find ways to seek financing or funding, because even your CPA will tell you, if you're going to buy a piece of equipment that has a 10-year useful life, taking out a 5-year loan for it, if your business can afford it, is usually a good way to kind of help manage and navigate, your financial picture. So just understand the process takes a little bit of time. You do need to do some homework, and, understanding when is the right time to borrow money is super important. And I think if we look at the next slide, I can use some more specific examples to kind of help you navigate this. So commercial credit is really thinking through what we call sometimes you'll hear people say the 5 C's, the 3 C's. I usually try to keep it simple, the 3 C's of credit, to say, okay, so what do I need to do to qualify for a commercial loan in traditional banking settings? try to break it down to these three simple things: cash flow, collateral, and then character/capacity. So cash flow, what I am looking for when I'm reviewing, either your historical tax returns or your business projections, is I'm looking to say, okay, does it look like this business has the ability to make the loan payments? I know it might sound kind of silly, but it's a super genuine exercise to say, what does it cost to turn the lights on at home? What does it cost to turn the lights on in the business? And do we have some excess cash flow here so that making loan payments every month makes sense? And on the consumer side, sometimes you hear about debt to equity ratios. On the commercial side, we call it debt service coverage ratio. So when you see 1.2 to 1.35 times, what we're looking for is to say, okay, based on the business's projections, based on the business's profit and loss, does it look like you have a minimum 1-to-1 is break even? Is your business break even? And then, is there 20 or 35% more wiggle room? Can it afford to take on these payments? I say this all the time, and I don't ever mean to sound corny. I mean it very sincerely. As a banker, we don't want to put you or your business into a loan that it looks like you can't afford. There was a project that came through very recently, huge budget. I mean, just I had to take a deep breath when I saw it and thought, wow, okay. I understand that construction costs are high. I understand that labor costs are high. But when we went digging through the projections and really had a discussion with this applicant about, do you realize how much it would cost you to borrow this much money on a monthly basis, and how much revenue you need to generate just to break even on your loan payments? Not to mention, you've got to cover payroll, you got to have insurance, you got to pay taxes. I mean, all of the expenses that come into a business. And I just don't think they realized they had this vision and this idea, but I don't think they really kind of took the full scope of what it means to borrow that much money and burden their business with that service. So it's a very serious consideration, but it's usually the first one that's made in commercial banking is, does it look like the individuals who own the business as well as the business can afford to make the payments? Now, and the comment that I have here about other household income, I think Joe mentioned a while ago, maybe it's not right time to quit your day job. In so many circumstances, people may have a great idea. They may have a really unique business opportunity, or their business that they've started is scaling and growing, and they do need to jump off and they can't maintain, two jobs. But what I always will say is there other household income? Because at the end of the day, you may have this beautiful growing business, but if it's struggling to make profitability, if it's struggling to be able to pay its own expenses, who is paying the rent for the person who owns the business? Who's paying their loan payments? Who's helping them, get their car payment made, or maybe their student loans paid? Sometimes in professional practices, you think about, doctors and dentists, sometimes they have huge student loans getting through their education. Well, many of them end up having to go to work for somebody else for a really long time before they kind of have their personal situation pulled together so that they can actually start or grow their own business. So kind of thinking through that whole cash flow position, what does the business generate, and then what does it cost to turn the lights on at home? And we bring those things together as we're reviewing it. I saw a question in the chat, Joe, but I didn't catch it. Is it related to cash flow?
No, it's a grant question. So you
Okay.
can
All right, we'll cruise back and catch it
hold on.
again.
Okay.
Yeah. So cash flow collateral is the next one. I think I talked a little bit about this in a previous slide, but it's just to think about, most commercial banks, we don't provide unsecured loans. We're federally insured institutions, and the federal government expects us to make safe and sound loans. And in my career, have I had loans, or businesses not succeed? Sure. It's super unfortunate. You hate to say it, but sometimes bad things happen to good people and to good businesses, and they're unable to make honor their obligations. So typically, if there's collateral behind the loan, those are things that can be liquidated and help pay the loan off. And in most small business situations, whether it's something like inventory in your business, equipment in your business, or do you own a home? Many times when we're doing SBA lending, we have to pull a junior mortgage on your home. So when people come in and say, "Oh, I'm not going to pledge my home for any business loan," that's not usually the best way to get off the right foot with your commercial banker, because sometimes those are just the rules of the program, whether it's for the Finance Authority of Maine or the SBA. You as an individual need to be able to put your personal assets in to be able to ensure that what you're looking to do and borrow will be successful. And if for some reason it's not, that the banks or others have ways to liquidate it to be able to make the bank whole. Commercial bankers are not investors in your business. We have bills to pay as well. So we want to try to make sure that when we're putting loans into your business, it looks like you and your business can afford to repay them. And then the character and capacity one is just super, super important. What is your prior experience? What industries have you worked in? Have you ever owned your own business? Have you worked for a small business? What is your personal credit? What is your reputation in the industry? If you don't know your personal credit, and there's a separate slide, we'll talk about that in a minute. But one story that I always tell when I talk about character and capacity is about a gentleman who was a truck driver, and he went to a convenience store every single day and bought coffee. When he retired, he decided he wanted to buy this convenience store that was in his neighborhood because he thought he knew it. He was in there every day buying his coffee. I didn't approve the loan at the time. Another bank did. This gentleman ended up struggling. He lost his business. And I had another customer who ended up coming in and buying the business because he was in the industry through a bankruptcy proceeding. And it was really unfortunate because I think, while this gentleman as a truck driver had lots of experience as a customer in the store, he'd never owned a convenience store. He'd never baked a pizza. Heck, I don't even know if he had ever made coffee before, which is probably why he was in buying his coffee. So I think really being able to tell the banker who you are, what is your experience, and how does that help you and your business be successful? Super, super important, particularly when you're seeking financing. We can go to the next slide. I didn't catch any of those other questions, Joe. I don't know if they're ones that are relevant to.
Yeah, there's a couple here. Maybe we can just
Okay.
take a quick sidebar. And
Yep.
and just as a time check, it's a little after 1. I've got to jump at 1:15.
Okay.
So if I run out of time, you can take the
Sure.
But the first question you could probably see, and that maybe you take the first one, Julie, and I'll take the second.
Okay. Grab it here. I don't see. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I'll just read it
Okay.
out. So
Yep.
it's basically with grants versus loans, what's the difference in terms of the oversight and accountability? To either, is one sort of more difficult to manage than the other?
Yeah, I think that the tricky part is understanding, for grant making decisions, organizations finding out what it is their objectives are, what your responsibilities are. There's less grants available on the everyday, market, so to speak. So I think, lending institutions, we are sort of, particularly when you're talking about a federally regulated institution, there's just certain things that we're looking for. And it really comes down to these 3 C's of credit. If there are hiccups in these pieces, then you want to have a conversation. You want to talk to a banker to understand where do you and your business fit into this, and how do we get you to that place? Now, maybe it's going back to Greater Portland Council of Governments if your business is here in Cumberland County. Maybe you're starting with one of those entities first. You may not quite be, there may be some other weaknesses, or maybe there's something in here that we wouldn't be able to get an SBA guarantee for. So, you may be looking at, talking to CEI about seeking some funding first. I think every situation is different. There is, like I said before, there is no one right answer, but understanding what your business's needs are and getting a chance to talk with the banker is usually the most important piece to help you figure out, which way to go. Everybody has terms and conditions, and understanding what those terms and conditions are as it relates to your business and your business objectives should be the place that help you make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, another high level, and you can tell me if you disagree with this, Julie, but grants are typically less oversight, less strings attached, smaller amounts. and loans
Yes,
are the other side of that equation. So that's a generalization, but as Julie says, everything's different. Every situation's a little
it
bit
is.
cash flow wise. It's, there's a question about how long can you go cash negative before you need to turn a profit. And there isn't really one size fits all on this one either. It's really a question of when you think about how much, this is when you think about how much money you have to spend in order to get to profitability. That's the amount of money that really need to raise or to generate or to identify at the outset. Because if you identify half of that and you're still burning cash, right, and then you run out of places to find capital, cash, money, I use those interchangeably, then that's a problem. So on balance, the sooner you can get to profitability, the better. And as Julie says, some business models are just really capital intensive, and if you're building a giant factory, obviously it may be several years before you actually turn a profit. But critically, before you build a factory, right, gets back to the bootstrapping point. You want to make sure that whatever you're going to be selling in that factory at scale, you can verify the assumption that people want that at a smaller scale somehow, in some minimum viable product, right? So that's the key, and that can dictate how long you're willing to go before profitability, and critically, how much funding you're able to access to allow you to get through that sort of quote unquote valley of death before you get to profitability. But I think profitability is super important. It's underappreciated, especially in popular culture where it's about like, hey, I'm successful because I just raised $10 million from a venture capitalist, or, Shark Tank sort of, I think, underscores this. You're successful if you get the funding. But really, the most successful businesses out there are the ones that are able to, execute and get to profitability, generate good cash flow. And certainly, from there, you have lots of options in terms of loans and things to accelerate your business, which is what Julie's talking about. All right. We'll try to speed up a little bit here.
So we can.
Slide.
Yeah. So real quickly, I mentioned this. If you do not know what your personal credit score is, please take the time to find out. Most credit card companies and maybe even your bank will give you access so you can see it. What we typically say is that a FICO score of over 700 is preferred. Have I funded people whose credit scores are less than 700? Sure. But if your credit score is less than 700, you really want to dig in and find out why and try to get yourself there. Personal credit is always pulled as part of commercial lending. So you really want to work real hard to have a good relationship with your personal credit before you start seeking commercial credit. Next slide. All right, the SBA, I mentioned the Small Business Administration. The SBA does not provide direct loans. You come to a banking institution to get SBA lending. We do a ton of it here at Lorem, and usually what it allows you to do is to get into your project with a little more flexible terms. They provide for the bank an agency guarantee, almost like an insurance policy. And it may allow you to get into your project for as little as 10 to 20% down of your total project cost. But again, very different programs, very different specifics, and you got to work with a local, or you got to work with an SBA lender to help. There's a great program, the SBA 504, if you're purchasing real estate or large pieces of equipment. But one thing that I always suggest to folks, if you're thinking about an SBA loan, you can always call me, I'll talk you through it. But there's something called the SBA lender match. So you can go in and provide a lot of information, and then also kind of control the flow of information that goes back out. You can see if there are local lenders who are interested in what type of financing you're seeking. Go to the next slide. All right, so this is just sort of the reality check, kind of like we started at the very beginning, things that, traditional banking typically doesn't fund. Startups. If you don't have any prior industry experience, you don't have really any sufficient cash flow, you don't have any savings or fallback, or if you've got an existing business and you're expanding without a plan. I need a working capital line of credit because I have seasonality in my business. Okay, well, tell me about that business. Tell me about your seasonality. Give me some projections. Tell me your story. If you have put money into your business as an owner and you want to buy out an investor, or you think you should be pulling your cash out, those are things that don't typically qualify for traditional financing. Your personal expenses should not be run through the business. If your business has ongoing losses or stories from the past, those are things that, again, traditional bricks and mortar banking is federally insured. So there are rules and places that we have to follow to check the boxes to make sure. Like I said, we want to try to put you and your business into a loan that it looks like you can afford. Go to the next slide. All right, so hopefully, Joe, do you have time to get started talking about equity?
Sure.
And
Yeah, this is
okay.
it's pretty brief. So this is the equity piece. Equity is, what's the definition of equity? Well, first of all, you hear a couple different terms which are both equity. You hear angel investment or venture capital. Both of these are examples of equity funding, which is investing in business in a business in return for part ownership of the business. So you sometimes, you can find money from an angel investor or a venture capital fund that, usually it's for 10, 20, 30% of your business. So you're giving up that piece of the pie, as it were. But the benefit is, at least hopefully, you grow the size of the pie so large that everyone wins. And when I say everyone wins, what happens is the goal of an equity investor is to make an investment, usually work directly with the founders to help the company grow as large and as fast as possible. And then when that pie is large, to sell the business to a buyer who's going to then take it to the next level within their organization. Or the company could go public and be listed on, the NASDAQ, but that's pretty rare. So it tends to be, a trajectory where when you take the money in, at that point, you're implicitly saying, I'm aligned with the investor here that we're running this thing for 5 years as hard and as fast as we can, and then we're going to sell the business. That is not a trajectory that many business owners want to be on. They want to own the business for their lifetime or for a generation and pass it down to kids, whatever. And that's totally fine. And that's how most businesses are run. But it's usually not the type of business that equity investors will invest into. And it's simply because there is no other mechanism for equity investors to be paid back unless the company sells. So that's where I think venture capital gets a bad name, and you hear private equity as well as a term here, where you take investment and then the investors are over time leaning on the founder to say, okay, it's time to sell. And the founder is saying, I don't want to sell, which is really just a misalignment from the beginning, right? You either want to be on that train from the beginning or you don't, in which case, you don't want to take that money. And as far as again, most businesses aren't sort of on that trajectory or don't want to be on that trajectory. The funding cycle itself, it takes a long time. It can be, a couple of months, but it can easily be 6 months. And there's many of the things that Julie talked about in terms of, understanding your story and the background and the financials behind the business. Much of that is similar with equity. The documentation, just like with debt, there's a document, a long document, and usually it's more than 100 pages long. That's full of legalese, but it's really specifying that alignment issue, right? What's the role of the investor once the investment's made? What's the exit strategy, right? What's that plan to sell and recoup the capital for investors? Can the company buy out the investor if they decide that they don't actually want to sell? Can the investor fire the founder if the founder is not performing? And these are all things that would be documented. And there's a great book, again, a book reference here called Venture Deals, which outlines the typical terms of an equity investment. And a lot of it is totally Greek. Like when I started at Main Venture Fund 5 years ago, I wasn't aware of about half of the terms that are used in doing these deals, but it's something that you can learn, and you want to learn before you negotiate a term sheet with a venture capitalist. And not all of I'd like to think not all VCs are bloodthirsty vampires, and like myself will sit across the table from you and like Julie described, help you understand the terms, help you understand what you're signing up for, because the last thing we want is for you to feel like you weren't aware of something when the investment was made. But that all being said, if you do fit this profile, right, there's an opportunity with venture capital to raise millions of dollars at a time, do big projects, and that's our shorthand is we're really trying to find the companies in Maine that are going to be the next Wexes and IDEXs and Covetruses, the next public companies or just large companies that are employing lots of people and making a big difference in the economy. Okay, that's 1:14. So we've got a minute here, and Julie, I may jump off and leave you to field questions if that's okay.
Sure can.
I think if there's a couple more slides, just a minute, and I'll stick around for those. But then once I shut down the slideshow, I'll just jump off the meeting, and you should be fine. Just to reiterate here, these are the high points that you take away. Businesses need outside cash to grow. Not always. If you can figure out a way to do it from scratch without outside capital, then great. Many of them do. There's lots of different sources. There's lots of different trade-offs. We talked about some of those today, but just really scratching the surface. And your general goal is to, how can you help find the right capital and understand the terms to maximize the upside and do as much bootstrapping as you can, as we've defined it here. I'm gonna go to the next slide. So we mentioned, I'll let you speak to this slide, Julie.
Yeah, so this is a really great slide. And again, something you'll want to take a look at when Jasper sends out the slides. Really kind of shows you a little bit about how are you funding and what are the options that are here in Maine. Everything from some of the really cool pitch contests that are out there that you can come and pitch and earn, grant money to, where are some of the specific grants and loans and, kind of community places to go to. So, the order of opportunities, like we said, it's usually personal savings, friends and family, crowdsourcing, grants, loans, equity. And I think this is just a great way to summarize all the things that we have kind of talked about. And I would say in here, some of the things that you might want to take a look at. There are programs like Top Gun, SBA Emerging Leaders Program, Rue Residency, Dirigo Labs. There are so many places where you can go as an entrepreneur, get connected with like-minded people in your field or in your space, or get matched with a mentor to help you kind of navigate where all of these pieces in the alphabet soup comes together. And this is a great summary of that. I think, is there any else? Yeah, so that concludes the slides. So Joe, if you need to take off, I can answer some remaining questions that are here. And yeah, Top Run is great. Yeah.
I'll stop sharing. Thank you all, and thanks, Julie, for sticking around.
Certainly. I think there was one other question in here about cash flow. Is there an acceptable amount of time a new business where cash flow would be negative? That is, time where outgo expenses are higher than incoming revenue. I think really, where this comes to is taking a look at your projections and understanding what we call in traditional banking, your total project cost. How much money do you need and how are you going to be spending it? I mean, for some businesses, even think about, in a seasonal business, there's that time of year where you're ramping up and there's a time of year where your customers are there and you're generating cash. So really understanding what that cycle looks like and what is the funding that you need. And I'll give you a specific example. If you're opening, say, a retail location in any particular city or town, you may be leasing space. You might have to, do some work in there. You might need to buy some equipment. And there's some lag time between the time that you start getting everything ready for your business and actually start seeing customers. So, as you're working on your cash flow projections and your business profit and loss, identifying those pieces. So when you come to seek traditional financing, maybe there's a term loan or a loan that gets repaid over 3 to 5 years for the equipment, for the leasehold improvements. And then maybe there's a working capital line of credit that kind of helps you navigate that timeline from when you're getting things ready to when you start accepting customers. Or, maybe your contribution is the cash that kind of gets you through those days until you actually have customers coming to the door, and your other loan funds, those hard costs or those overhead costs. So again, it really varies by how you're going to spend the money, how we look at it in traditional financing, but being able to document that is the most important part so that I can understand what is the nature of your business. How does your business generate cash? And then, when you need to spend money for your business, what is the best way to do it? It might be a term loan, it might be a line of credit, it might be, part of the equity injection that you bring to the business, but usually it's some combination of all of those sources that help us, help you build a financing table. But like Joe talked about, if yours is a business that is, high growth, very capital intensive, traditional banking may not be for your financing. You might be looking at things like venture capital, equity investors, those kinds of things. So each circumstance is a little bit different. But what I do encourage you to do is to get connected with mentors, reach out to folks like myself and ask your friends and family, do you have a commercial banker? Who's your commercial attorney? Who's your commercial insurance agent? Kind of networking through your peer group to help you get ideas and recommendations of who has been somebody that has helped you navigate your small business journey. Will be good people to get referrals from to help navigate that. I see a hand up. Did you want to ask a question, Joelle?
I was just going to elaborate on that one. I think the piece that I'm struggling with is my business that I want to create is more of a knowledge worker one. So there's not a lot of big investment costs. There is a lot of potential to bootstrap, but one of the things that I'm struggling with is figuring out how to free up my time as the knowledge worker to put in the time to make this grow at any sort of reasonable rate. So that's where that, time to profitability, I could build this over, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, bootstrapping it and doing it nights and weekends, but that's going to be really slow. And so that's the extra piece that's harder when it's not like I need to buy this machine.
Most certainly. And I think that's sort of that, I often refer to it sometimes as, the gig economy. People have their day job and then they've got this other, like you say, this other type of industry or profession that they have experience with, and trying to figure out when is the time to jump off from that. And usually what I say to folks, and it's kind of something you may have seen or heard in social media, can you build sort of that 90-day or 6 month in some cases, can you build those reserves to say, okay, I have the reserves set aside for me to manage my personal expenses in order for me to jump off and grow what my business needs. Do I have the means with which to do it? And I think sometimes that's the hardest part. People, and again, I think it comes from the experience of buying a car. You just walk in and there's all these salespeople and all this hubbub, and they say, what's your monthly payment? And that is just such a small part of what it is for financing. And when you're running and growing a business that has its own, its own personality, its own presence, its own trade, its own brand, it's just not that simple. So I think, in the years that I've helped people fund and grow businesses, it's really understanding the relationship between what is your personal, sort of, I would say, what does it cost to turn the lights on at home? What does it cost to turn the lights on in your business? And then how do we bring those two things together so that we're making an educated guess? Does it look like, your business can support to take care of things at home, but also take care of growing the business? And sometimes, in a business like yours, it might be a small line of credit to sort of get you through the ebbs and flows of, maybe there's seasonality, or maybe that you take on a project where you have to do a lot of the work up front and you don't get paid till the end. So can you create creative ways? It's a third, a third, a third. In the contracting industry, I think in the state of Maine, there's a limit with what you can take up front, but sometimes that's what you're using in the contracting industry to be able to get the materials. Maybe make a little payroll so you can get the project rolling. So are there creative ways to work with your customers to kind of help finance your business? And it's another, that can be another source of capital, is if your vendors will provide you with credit terms. Well, they give you 30, 60, or 90 days to pay them so that you can use your customers' money and their money to kind of get things growing and not necessarily have to take it out of your checking account. And I think the other things that I always say to folks is, being mindful of, just because there's money in your checking account does not mean your business is profitable, does not mean your business is successful. So understanding that relationship to your financial statements, whether it's a good bookkeeper, whether it's working with somebody at SCORE who can help you develop all those things. I mean, the information you put into QuickBooks is no good if you don't understand the information coming out of it. A bookkeeper is another person who should be very high on your list of professionals as you're navigating and growing and launching your small business. Does that sort of answer your question? Okay, good. And I see another one in here. Do you know of any grants or resources that would help pay with a patent application? I think what I would say, I don't know of any personally, other than I would start with the folks at MTI to see, what is your patent? Is it something technology based? Or looking into the industry groups with which your patent is, going towards. A lot of times in industry or trade associations, it can be tricky because there's what's the word I'm looking for? Proprietary information. You don't necessarily want to give out the details of what it is that you're doing. I worked with a business a legacy business that was launching and growing a new product line. And we were providing financing for a large production line. And it was interesting how we had to go about describing what that was in our loan documents, because it was very proprietary and very unique and innovative what they were doing here in Maine. But we were able to work with their trade industry to help us say, okay, in other situations, even the bank went to the trade industry, in other situations, how do these things get handled? So I think, here in Maine, I usually start with folks like MTI, and I usually start with folks at CEI, if yours is a women-based business, to say, okay, what do you know in this area? Who do you know in that area? And or, if there are particular trade associations that might, have areas of expertise or pockets of money for them. Grants are just, I don't want to tell you that they're not out there, but they are just challenging to find. And in this post-COVID financial kind of place that we're in, I see less and less of them the last couple of years that I have seen, prior to 2020. I think that, a lot of those sources have kind of dried up, unfortunately. It's not good news, but it's the reality. We've covered a lot of ground since noontime, and I think we've had some great questions. I think all of you have some really interesting business ideas and opportunities, and if I can help, feel free to reach out to me here at the bank. I work with a great team of lenders, so if I'm not available, there's somebody here. If you don't have a SCORE mentor already, I just can't tell you how much I encourage you to reach out and try that. There may or may not be somebody there that can help you, but I guarantee you will get something from the experience, as well as taking a look at the other workshops that are out there. All of us who do workshops are more than willing to, take the time to help you navigate. I congratulate you for taking the time today, for coming in here to take a perspective about financing and funding. I get real passionate when people say, oh, there's no funding, access to capital is difficult. Well, there's a lot of work that you need to do, as you've learned about here, but do we fund small businesses and startups every single day? The work that Joe does with Maine Venture Fund, and I'm really privileged to be on their board, there's some really cool businesses that are doing some really impressive things in Maine. But there's a lot of hard work that goes behind the scenes on running the business, but also putting together the packages of information. And, if you think about creating a business plan, if you think about creating projections, it's really your benchmark. It's that conscious decision to say, this is what my business is. These are our goals. These are our objectives, really digging into a budget to understand what the costs are. But then having, those projections to say on a month-to-month basis, am I generating enough revenue? Oh my gosh, are my expenses where they should be? If I had any commentary to say about customers in my portfolio in the last couple of years, labor has been really expensive, and then supplies and things, in the trades, whether it's lumber or steel or, food, the cost of goods sold, it's been tricky and challenging. So having good plans, understanding your financials, and being able to kind of check the box. Because like I think I said once earlier, just because there's money in your checkbook doesn't mean your business is strong financially or profitable. But understanding all of the concepts behind it, taking time to educate yourself in classes like this, but truly being able to navigate the financial sector to make good decisions for you and your business as you grow, as you scale.
Thanks so much, Julie. You know, it's we here at Score are here for any of those questions like that, you know, from cash flow projections to operating your business. Like you said earlier, if you don't already have a Score mentor, what are you doing? You know,
That's
we're a
right.
free service, and we're happy to help anyone with any part of the life of their business too. We do have, mentors versed in funding as well. So before you reach out to the bank, we're here to help you get ready for that. As well as, like you said, our other workshops. We have a specific cash flow projection workshop coming up, which may be useful to anyone that needs to put one together. And yeah, anyway, does anyone have any more one more question before we head out for the day here? I think that probably about covers it then. Well, thank you so much, Julie. Invaluable information as always. And Joe, I know he's not here, but always super important to have his side of the story here too. And we want to thank Gorham Savings Bank again for sponsoring this workshop. And one more time, if you don't already have a SCORE mentor, you can apply for one for free at score.org. It's confidential one-on-one business mentoring. We can mentor in person, via Zoom like this, or over the phone, however you're comfortable with, we're here for you. And thanks again for everyone attending today. And thanks one more time to Julie for a great presentation. Josephine, yes, you can. Usually locally, we try to keep it to one with co-mentors, but since we are a nationwide organization, if you find a mentor outside of Maine that is a fit for you, feel free to reach out to them. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Have a great afternoon. Thanks, everybody.